Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Rise Above TV, where we are empowering humanity and supporting unity. You're watching Good Grief, where we're meeting loss with presence, one wave at a time. Hosted by Janie Terrazas, the Mindfulness Coach, and Kelvin Chin, an internationally recognized author, meditation expert, and grief and death guide with over 50 years of experience, helping people navigate life's most profound questions. He is the founder and executive director of the Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation, the Turning Within Meditation Foundation, and kelvinchin.org, nonprofit platforms dedicated to reducing fear, deepening inner peace, and empowering individuals to live more fully in the present moment. Thanks again for being here with us on Good Grief. I'm pumped to be back with Kelvin. We touched on a few things on our first episode about just what grief is in general, and we mentioned something about the myths of grief. And so today I wanted to touch on that, and then we'll see where that conversation leads us next. Let's start with what you feel are some of the bigger myths that people have heard of and believe in that maybe we need to open our minds a little bit and open our hearts around.
Yeah, so I think everybody who has had a loss of any kind, whether it's a loss of a loved one, and it could be a human loved one, or it could be a pet, it could be a horse, it could be any living being, really, who they're connected with, or
Mhm.
the loss of something inanimate, like losing a house in the fire or a flood, or um, losing, money, losing a job, a lot of different forms of loss, losing a relationship, divorce, or
Yes.
separation, and so forth.
Yes.
Those are all losses. But people have typically heard myths said to them that do not
Hmm.
make them feel good. And that's typically a huge red flag, where people say things like, don't feel badly. That's a classic myth. Like, what? I'm feeling terrible right now. I just had this huge loss. Telling me not to feel badly? How
Oh my gosh.
It's not helpful. They're in a better place. That kind of stuff. They're at peace now if you lose a loved one.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, we understand why the person is saying it. It's because they're trying to make you feel better when you've experienced a loss. But I think we've all been in the receiving position of that at some point in our lives. And does it make you feel better? No, it makes you feel like unheard, like it's what you're experiencing is somehow invalid. No. So
Yeah.
that's a classic myth. Another one is just to replace the loss. Just keep busy, keep busy, keep. You hear people say that all the time. I just keep busy. Those are a couple of related losses. Sometimes people call them those two different losses. Like the one replace the loss and keep busy, but same basic thing. It's no. You when you're feeling how you're feeling, and you're feeling sad, you're feeling conflicted. Sometimes comes along with grieving is conflicted feelings over the loss of whatever the familiar
Mm.
person or situation was that you now have lost. Those are normal feelings, and we need to embrace it. We need to allow it to happen. We don't like it. I'm not saying embrace it in terms of liking it, but we need to not resist it. And these kinds of myths, like replace it or just keep busy, do something else, take your mind off of it. That's another statement you'll hear people say, another myth. It doesn't help by trying to push your mind off of it. In fact, what that does is it makes it even more powerful and more present and comes up 10 times stronger. Um,
Yes, it's like that saying, what you resist persists.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I did a seminar for a group of 500 military families who had lost loved ones in the military,
Hmm.
U.S. military. And of course, it could have been husband, wives, have been, it could be brothers, sisters, grandchildren. It didn't matter
Right.
who or what the relationship was, but they had all lost loved ones in the military. And their big myth that they asked me to speak about, and we ended up talking about all the different myths and so forth, but the big one for them was be strong for others. That was the one that they kept
Mm,
on military bases. You got to be strong for the children. You got to be strong for the surviving, the children who are obviously who have lost their father or mother. You got to be strong. You got to be strong. Okay, I get it. What they're trying to, you know, bolster you up and help you feel strong, because the children need support. All right, but the problem
mhm.
saying that in that way is it again denigrates, it demeans the feelings of the person who's had that tremendous loss, including the children. Hello, the children have lost their parent, being strong for the children. So to me, if the child has lost a loved one like a father or mother, and there is a surviving
Mhm.
mother, parent, then or grandparent, the best thing to do, if you want to use strong, the strongest, healthiest thing to do is to support
Mhm.
that surviving loved one, whether it's a child or grandchild or a surviving spouse, in their grief. And that means allowing them to experience and feel what they're feeling and to not try to push it away.
Exactly. And I feel like a lot of times when parents, let's say, like I had a friend, and I know it's different when you're as opposed to losing like an actual human being, right? But they had their family pet who had been with them like for forever. My friend Cindy, she had two little girls. She was really wanting to keep it together and not show them her pain. And I feel like knowing how to be with your pain in a healthy way around your children also helps them learn that it's okay to feel those feelings. Does you know what I mean?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Demonstration by the parent or the grandparent, by the adult, let's just say, demonstrating to the child by the adult is how a child learns. And you may not think that you're teaching them, but you are by your good and your bad behavior, you know? So, you know, need to be mindful of our behavior, be self-aware
Mm-hmm.
behavior as adults when we're with children, because we're modeling. You may not think you're modeling for them intentionally, but the fact of the matter is, whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's happening. They're picking it up,
Exactly.
picking up on it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a really,
Yes.
really,
Yeah, and yeah, I was really encouraging my friend, she was like, I don't really know how to be. And I'm like, I be human. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean completely lose yourself in front of your children or anything. I understand it's kind of like a Goldilocks spot, I call it, right? It's like, how can you be with the pain while also not letting it consume you and just breaking you to pieces, even though you feel like you're in a million pieces?
yeah. And saying to a child that I'm as I'm missing mom as much as you are. I miss her terribly. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how I'm going to deal with this either, but we're going to deal with this together, and I'll be there for you. And because really, the child is not looking for an answer. The child is looking for support and wants
Yes.
the ongoing support. They just
Mm,
lost their mother or their father, and they don't want to lose you, who is the surviving person,
hmm.
either,
Yeah.
including losing you in some um, kind of grieving morass. It's not
Mm,
you have to show them that you're in control all the time. Crying is part of the grieving process. And I think a lot of adults feel like somehow it's inappropriate to cry in front of their children over the loss of
Yes.
spouse. I don't know. I'm not here to tell people how to parent their children, but I think it's a mistake.
Mhm.
I think you need to be real, as you say, and again, you're not losing it in your in front of your children, losing control.
You could do that on your own in the bathroom, like when you're in the shower or something.
Crying with them, crying with them is there's a healthy aspect to that. You know, another myth is
Hmm.
you hear all the time, it's a time one. You hear people say time heals all wounds. And that's total ridiculous. Time does not heal
I
all
agree.
wounds. It's like we can
No.
work through our pain and by expressing it, and there's various um, methods, modalities that are helpful in regards to this. But the issue um, of just sitting back and waiting for time to heal things um, is a myth. You know, we need to
Yeah.
process if there are conflicting feelings there. We need to resolve some of those conflicting feelings in order to move forward with
Hmm.
our life,
Yeah.
and and accepting the fact that they would just talk about losing a loved one in this case,
Hmm.
that they're not going to be here with us in a biological form, at least, um, anymore. Accepting that does not mean forgetting who they were and how and our relationship with them and so forth. Um, it means moving forward. It, in this new
Hmm.
state that people could say is a grieving state. And one could argue that one will always be grieving that loss forever. But the issue is, can we
Hmm.
do it in a way we're not consumed by that grief and the sadness and so forth?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So, but
Yeah, it's not like this end destination grief,
exactly.
like we were saying before. The memories are always going to be there. And it's how we put meaning to the loss and how we frame it and the tools that we use. And like you said, with time, people think, there's got to be effort, right? There's some effort and some tools and some things that you got to do for your own self, as opposed to just sitting back and thinking that as time passes, you're going to get better. No, there's things that we can do to be with it as time passes so that the grip, like we said in the first episode, right? The grip around you, it starts to like loosen up a little bit. And also, going back to what you said, acceptance, people think that means that they're completely fine and they're okay with the loss. No, that's not what it means.
Yeah.
It's this accepting new reality and giving yourself the time and space and seeking the support that you need, right? Because trying to do it on your own is not always ideal. A big part of healing is done on our own, but having, a solid person or a support system outside of you to help you get through it, especially if you do have children and stuff, sometimes you need a little guidance on how to best handle those conversations and stuff in a mindful way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm a big believer in psychotherapy in certain situations, and this is one of them. And I'm not a psychotherapist, and neither are you.
Hmm.
I'm not here to
Right,
promote, we're not here, purporting to be therapists, but
right.
referrals from psychotherapists to help them, their clients, their patients with grieving issues and so forth. But the therapists the person may need professional therapy, and that can be very, very helpful in terms of processing, especially conflicting feelings around the loss. I helped one gentleman who's he lost his wife died after a very long marriage together, and he was going to grief groups, and what what he was struck by was how many people had been going to the same grief group in his city for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years going to the same grief group, telling the same story again and again about grieving. And he went for, I think, a year or something like that. But people would, it was almost like a badge to them about how, like how long they had been going. And he was telling me, I want to be here 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, go into this same group. So he talks about this on my website, on my grieving page, but grief page on my website. But I helped him manage through a number of his issues around which he had conflict internally about his relationship with his wife, who he loved dearly. But there's no relationship that's perfect, perfect, perfect. The best relationship out there, and there's people sometimes they kind of deify almost the loved one, and they never did anything wrong. We never had any disagreement. Really? No, I think the reality is something different from that. And seeing where the conflicting feelings that we may still harbor, and working through those and talking them out with somebody, a third party, um, can be very, very helpful, because otherwise you're carrying them around, or you may be walking around in this illusion that your relationship was perfect. But
Mm-hmm.
inside, from a feeling standpoint, that there was some conflict, there was some conflict here and there. So those
Yes.
that type of I think that's a really important point in the grieving process that people need to acknowledge, because most people
Mm-hmm.
grieving in terms of sadness. Sometimes the sadness can not just be associated with the loss, it can be also associated with the misperception that the relationship was perfect.
Right. And you were saying earlier, I wanted to touch on how those that go into groups, and again, to me, everything is about moderation, right? And just kind of finding that balance. But some people do end up getting addicted to those support groups. And in a way, the story that they're telling really kind of keeps it locked in place. So they might be healing to some degree, but that alone can sometimes keep it locked in. And so I wanted to mention that. So I'm glad that, you brought up your client mentioning that.
But there's nothing wrong with going to groups. I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I've led many group sessions,
Hmm.
and it can be very helpful, especially
Yeah.
especially for people who've had a relatively recent loss. So,
Yes.
because
Yeah, I highly recommend finding a group that fits you and that you feel safe around. It was just those rare instances sometimes, like you said, where people end up going for years and then it becomes like this badge of honor. Now, a lot of times they end up being like mentors for other people in the group, and that's really beautiful too, because at the end of the day, to be able to be of service and repurpose our pain in that way is a really beautiful thing. So yeah, I don't want to confuse people, but it definitely is something that happens. What do you recommend when somebody comes to you and has unresolved issues, maybe with a parent or like a partner, right, in a relationship? Is there a method or a process or like journaling exercises? Like, what do you typically tell people to do in those instances?
journaling exercises that I suggest people do in that situation, and I help them go through it, and then we discuss it and so forth. But yeah,
Okay.
I think it's good to get that out in writing, or dictating, depending on how comfortable people are with actual writing. But you can
Hmm.
dictate it also, and get it out and so forth. And there's some kind of there's some charting, making a chart, for example, of the relationship and so forth, that I've learned when I got certified as a grief recovery counselor. It was one of the things that we learned as well. But yeah, those can be very helpful. The last myth, Janie, is just really is just the general one that we know is not healthy, but you hear it and you see it a lot, is just burying your feelings. If you're like, you'll see sometimes people say, well, if you're that upset, why don't you go upstairs? Go upstairs and cry, whatever. Go to
Yeah.
your room. It's like it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible message to say to anybody, whether they're a child or an adult. But I've heard stories of that about adults saying that to their children because they got a they got a family gathering or they got friends over and they don't want people crying in the living room because we're about to have some fun playing whatever. No, that's the moment you go embrace the person. You take them, you they don't have to be the center of attention if it's a social gathering or whatever, but
Right.
as a compassionate, loving human being who cares about that person, whatever your relationship is with them, friend, family member, whatever, you go embrace them and you allow them to express their feelings in whatever verbal or physical crying way it is. However,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, we really have we touched on this in the last segment or episode that we did, which is, you know, we struggle with feelings and emotions like in general, like especially ones that are more like adverse, let's say sadness or anger. We don't really know what to do with them a lot of times, and we're ashamed when we cry. I mean, think about how many times people start crying over something. Maybe they're excited, they're happy, they're sad, or whatever. They get emotional, and we're always like, "Oh, I'm sorry," you know. We never really say sorry when we laugh, and that's a natural, expression. But we always want to say sorry when we cry. And I don't know if you could touch a little bit on the science, but I know it's very cathartic. Tears help release like oxytocin, I believe, or there's definitely chemicals in the tears that when we allow ourselves to release them as opposed to keeping it in, like it's like a dam, right? Holding back all this water. It actually just creates more inflammation. So I don't know if you know anything about tears and any of that kind of stuff, the science behind it.
There's an essay in my book. This is my second book of essays.
Sweet.
And I have an essay in here, Crying is Not Weakness. So
Mm,
specific on this topic that exactly what you're talking about, and how, just like you said, we can cry for many reasons, sadness, happiness, just a release of pressure sometimes,
yes.
longing for someone or something or some place. It may not be a loss of a death of a loved one, but it's just maybe a place. It could be, oh, you miss being in this place where you grew up, and you start tears
True.
or whatever, or just recognition. You can have we can tear up from recognition. Some very often, if you have an old relationship, somebody you haven't seen in a long time, and you're both still alive, it's not
Yeah.
loss in that respect in terms of a death, but you haven't seen each other for a long time, and you tear up. All of these things we should never apologize for these. It's we see it on TV all the time, people apologizing. To me,
Yes.
of inner strength. To me, it's a sign that the person has a high enough sense of self-confidence that they can let it out in public.
Yes.
There may be some biochemistry behind it too.
Speaking of like, just us being afraid of showing emotions, just in general, there's a huge fear around death, just dying. I don't know if you want to kind of get into that a little bit
Sure, yeah. So
about our outlook on and point of view on death. And I know we don't have to go too deep into it, but there's like the Western culture and the Eastern cultures, a lot of times they will have some differing viewpoints on death. But I also know that in general, across like the board and around the world, there's just some general struggle with it.
yeah, yeah. I help people in 70 countries now, so it's worldwide for sure. Um, yeah. First of all, let's just talk 100,000 foot about the concept of fear of death,
Okay.
death and dying issues in general. Because
Hmm.
a lot of times I find when people contact me, they think they have a fear of death, and they may have a fear of death, but they actually may not have a fear of death, they may have a related fear. So what do I mean?
Mm.
So a lot of times people put everything in this death bucket, we'll call it, this big huge bucket, and they put anything that's about death and dying in there. But I actually break it out into separate um, concepts. Why? Because the solution for one of these may be different from another one, depending on which concept of death we're talking about. So what do I mean by that? Here's an example. So when I talk about overcoming the fear of death, like that's the title of my first book, right? Overcoming the fear of death. So when we're talking about overcoming the fear of death, I'm talking about what I mean by that is my death, overcoming
Mm.
fear of my death. Okay. So it's a personal fear that one has, a a fear about death, or it's sometimes people refer to it as death anxiety, whatever. But it's about
Mhm.
a person's death, overcoming the fear of death. There are other fears that are related to it, like the fear of pain and suffering. The fear of pain and suffering is a big fear, but a lot of people think, oh, that
Mhm.
fear of death, and they just put it into that same bucket as the personal fear about what happens after they biologically die. That's how I would describe the
Yeah.
first. What happens after I biologically die? It's my fear about myself, okay, dying. The second
Mhm.
we're talking about here that's a related fear, but it's not the same, is I'm afraid of how I'm going to die. It's not
Mhm.
after I die. It's how am I going to die before I'm dead? What's going to happen? Sometimes people refer to that as the fear of pain and suffering. Okay, am I going to
Yeah.
have pain? Am I going to suffer before I die? How am I going to die? That's a separate fear. Okay, and it has separate solutions to it. That's why I separate them. And then other fears are related fears are like fear of losing loved ones, the fear of not being around and missing seeing one's children grow up and so forth. That's not the same as I'm afraid of what's going to happen after I biologically die. That's what I call the fear of death. Okay. Those are other related fears. For those people who may believe in an afterlife, they may be afraid of what's going to happen to them in their afterlife. The fear of punishment, right? After I biologically die, am I going to be punished? You know, that's a big one for a lot of people. Um, what if people believe in reincarnation, they can still have fears that are related to death because they're worried about maybe coming back as a mosquito. I don't want to come back as a mosquito.
Yeah.
This is just like
Yeah.
name it. It can be there, right? So it's not
Yeah.
people think Western, Eastern. This goes to your other question. People think Western, Eastern. Is it people in the East don't have fears about death and dying? Yes, they do. They may believe in an afterlife and they may believe in reincarnation even, but they can still have the what I call the mosquito fear, whatever. Like,
Right.
but I think of it not so much as Western and Eastern, although I understand how you could. Uh,
Mhm.
when I started first talking or thinking about death and dying, and then talking to others about it when I was in law school, right after my mom died, um, I would notice that people would kind of knee jerk to their religious belief system, and that's kind of makes sense. This is not a criticism. This is just an observation. It's
Mhm.
kind of normal. They would knee jerk to whatever their religious upbringing was about death and dying. And what I started seeing was that people would start to get um, a little holier than thou about their belief system about death. They would try to convince other people, in other words, that
Oh,
their
yeah.
belief about death was the right one, that there was a right belief about death, and everybody else was wrong about the. And I take the view that people have different beliefs, and I'm not here to change their beliefs. I can't change their beliefs, so why should I knock my head against the wall trying to change people's beliefs. People's beliefs are what their beliefs are, and I respect that. And instead, what I do is I help people look through their belief lens, and then
Hmm.
I help them get rid of their fears because I'm the anti-fear guy. But I'm
Right.
to change their beliefs. Um, so that's why I came up with the full title of this book. I don't know if you can see it, is Through Each of the Four Main Belief Systems. That's the subtitle. Through each of the four main belief systems, overcoming fear of death through each of the four main belief systems. The four main belief systems are not religious beliefs or cultural beliefs. They're the underlying beliefs kind of that are underlying the religious and cultural beliefs that are out there. And this Wikipedia
Hmm.
says there's 4,000 religions on planet Earth. I don't know how they counted that, but 4,000 religions. And how many cultural beliefs about death and dying about are out there too? Whatever. So I'm not here to try to change those 4,000 beliefs into one belief. People have their beliefs, and that's okay. But so what I did was I thought about this, and my friend George and I were talking and came up with these four beliefs that are not religious and cultural beliefs. So the first one is a science belief. That's, there is no afterlife. There is no heaven. There's no nothing. That you die, you biologically die, you have one life, and you biologically live it, and you biologically die, and you've ended that life. That's it. That's the science belief. That's what I call the first belief system. The second belief system we kind of touched on a few minutes ago, um, is what I call the fear of continued existence. So that's where people do believe that there's an afterlife, but they're afraid for all kinds of reasons. It might be fear of punishment, but it might be something else, who knows what. But there's afraid, there's fear. They are afraid. There is fear in their consciousness, in their belief system about what's going to happen. And then the third belief system is there's no fear, but they do believe in an afterlife or heaven, and
Mm.
they're maybe even looking forward to it. The fourth belief system
Yeah.
is the incarnation one, where they believe in past lives and you can have a future life and come back again and again if you want to, and so forth. That's the reincarnation belief. Pretty much everybody on planet Earth falls somewhere in there. This
Hmm.
percentage of the 8 billion population on planet Earth who believe in reincarnation. It's a very, very large percentage. I can't remember, it's like, is it 20, 30% of the world's population believes in reincarnation?
Hmm.
United States alone, it's fairly significant, 10, 15% of Americans believe in reincarnation. It was a much higher percentage. It was a Gallup poll that was done in the 1990s. I wouldn't have guessed that the number was so high, but yeah,
When you were listing them, it sounds like, oh, at least two of them could overlap.
there's a lot of overlap between one and two of the
Uh,
people who contact me, because the people who contact me about fears about death and dying have fears about death and dying. So they're going to typically be a one or a two belief system, one or a two,
right.
or very often they're a combo platter of one and two, and they don't even realize it. Part of the conversation that I have with them, and by the way, I do a free initial phone consultation with anybody in the world about anything that I do. The first phone call is free.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
Yeah.
the nonprofit charity work that we do. But very often they'll come to me and they think they have the science belief system one. They think, oh, I don't believe in, there's nothing going to happen. And I said, well, what's your fear about that? First of all, I define fear for them as fear is the emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness.
Mm.
Okay,
Hmm.
what is your fear about then if you really believe in belief system number one, that your biological body's going to die and that's it? What are you anticipating happening afterwards? You're telling me that you're anticipating nothing happening, that there is no continuation of consciousness or the mind or the soul or the spirit or whatever you want to call it. If you believe in belief
Hmm.
one. And that's kind of an epiphanous moment for them, an aha moment for them very often because they realize, oh, yeah, because it doesn't make sense.
Really. It
sense
wouldn't matter.
sense to have fear if I really have belief system number one. So all these years I've been thinking I have belief system number one, but I really have a belief system number two creeping in there.
Right, exactly. And now with everything that we know about physics and everything else too, it's like even with like science, like now science, when you study like consciousness and physics and quantum mechanics and entanglement and you study the laws that govern the universe, it's kind of hard not to believe that whatever's powering the body up, because this is temporal, that can't be created or destroyed. So, you know, there's lots of debate on what happens and what goes on after, but that which is powering it up cannot be, it's invisible, but it's indestructible.
What Janie's referring to is the first law of thermodynamics, so which says that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So, if our biological body is energy, but our mind is made of what then? Our mind is also made of energy. So here's an interesting,
Yeah.
and therefore cannot be created nor destroyed. So, um, but the biological body can end, but since it's made of energy, it still retains its existence, but in a different form. That's the issue.
Yeah.
And so the biological body, if it's buried in a grave, turns to dust. So it doesn't disappear. The energy, it changes form. Now the body is dust. Or if you cremate the person, so forth, so on, and some of it goes in heat, in the form of heat, etc. So forth. But so energy is still, the form is still retained in terms of its energy, but it doesn't have the same physical form biologically that it
Right.
was alive. Okay. But if
Exactly.
it continues, then what's that? Here's a new point that I've been raising lately,
Hmm.
which is it's not a new idea, but it's a point that I've been emphasizing more recently, which is I think the mind is material. So a lot of times in spiritual groups, you'll hear people talk about the body being physical and the mind being mental. I think that's true. But I've added the word biological in talking about the body because the mind
Hmm.
still exists, in my experience anyway, after the biological body dies. Because those of you who know
Yep.
about my background, I've had many experiences on the other side. And so, and I've had dead loved ones visit me. So who is visiting me if they're not in some identifiable energy form? They are identifiable because identifiable means what? I can identify who they are. Oh, it's my mother, it's my father, it's my dead friend, it's my one of my old teachers, it's whoever it is. It's
Hmm.
identifiable. Their individuality still exists. It's identifiable. Who's the medium talking to? If the medium is not talking to cosmic soup, they're talking to your dead loved one or whatever, your dead child, or whoever it is. That energy
Yes.
is identifiable. In that way, I'm calling that material. It's not immaterial. It's not virtual. And so a lot of times in these quantum mechanics discussions, they use this description of virtual because the reason behind it, I think, is easily taken care of. You don't have to call it virtual, and it's not virtual. It's material, it's energetic. Because if you talk to a physicist and you ask a physicist, just a regular physicist, is light, is energy, is it identifiable? Is it material? They would say yes, light is material. Energy is material. It can be measured. Well, if that's the case, that makes to me makes sense with what my personal experience is with visitations I've had from dead loved ones, that they are identifiable and therefore they are material. Their energy is identifiable. I think it's a
Right.
mistake that a lot of spiritual people, including some of these physicists, quantum physicists, are talking about this in a virtual way. You don't have to create a theory of virtual reality to describe heaven. Heaven
Hmm.
is a place of light and it's measurable, and heaven is a material place. Again, this flies in the face of the way most people think of it because they think of material as biological. Light is made of particles. In fact, the notion of what an atom is not small enough. I think that there are particles, whatever you want to call them,
Sure.
are infant, tiny, like quintessential, like I don't know, like
Nano. It's like the quarks, like even like, you know what I mean? Like you go into quarks and then you go into smaller parts and it's like the little Russian doll thing.
much smaller than the smallest particle that our current science
Can
is
even
measure.
measure. Yeah.
Much smaller than that. And that, I think, is why we can explain um, the afterlife in much more logical, rational terms than most people think of.
Yeah. And I do like how you're doing your best to describe how it's possible for, let's say, like even our body, we have a fingerprint, that signature essence of what made that person, like the mental, emotional aspects of the person that are not, right, like maybe solid, but they're still somehow being contained. And so when you have an experience with them, whether it be through dreams or an awakened state or whatever, and you have these transcendental experiences with the other side, um, that's what you're having an experience with. It's like that signature fingerprint kind of stays in some capacity.
Yes, you recognize that. You
Yeah, you can feel it.
People talk about that all the time. I recognized her voice or his voice. I recognized the feeling. Sometimes people
Hmm. The
smell the
smell. Yes.
cologne. There's no cologne in the room that could be
Yeah.
as what we call cologne, and yet they smell that. And so that person on the other side, the being, whatever you want to call it, the person,
Sure.
I sometimes refer to them as personalities, on the other side has
Right.
smell and can project that to you in the form of their cologne. That's identifiable to me. That
Yes.
recognizable to me. Those that's like a it's like a transponder. I call it an identifiable energy pattern. It's like a transponder in an airplane or a helicopter. They're giving off a signal. They're giving off a signal that's unique to that vehicle. And I think it's the same, very similar thing with our energy pattern, the soul that is of who we are. The soul that's Kelvin Chin is not the same. It is the same soul, but it's not the same body or name that Kelvin Chin has now in 20th and 21st century Earth 150 years ago, or 250 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. But it's the same soul. And so you can identify that. It to me, it's for people who can't have a difficulty wrap their mind around this. It's the same as look, think about your one lifetime in this lifetime. Are you the same soul now that you're 53 years old or whatever you are, 40 years old, 30 years old, 60 years old? Are you the same soul as it when you were 4 years old? When you were 2 years old, when you're 10 years old? Yes, you are the same soul. Do you have the same, did you have the same experience that you have now? No, your experience has grown. That's not what we're talking about. Your experience has grown. Your maybe your learnings and how you've skinned your knees and learned it through this situation
Right.
changed over the years, but you still remember who you were when you were 4, 5, or 6, or 10, or 15, or 20 years old. You still remember that person. It's not like you wake up every morning going, "Who am I now?" I mean, I have no idea who I am. No, there's continuity there, and
Yes.
what we're referring to that can happen from lifetime to lifetime. But if you don't believe that about lifetime to lifetime, that's okay. Just look at your own lifetime, this one life, how the continuity of your soul or your consciousness or your mind, whatever word you want to use,
Mhm.
whole lifetime. Now,
Yeah.
not everybody can remember back when they were 3 years old or 2 years old. I get it. But
Yeah.
just 15 years or 10 years, you're the same person, aren't you? Yeah, things have changed somewhat, this and that, but you're not waking up going, I have no idea who I am. No.
Yeah. Unless you have some sort of accident, you get amnesia, and even that's such an interesting thing to consider too. It's so weird. Memory is such a strange thing.
We're not talking about the outlier situation like that, but yeah, yeah. There's continuity in our consciousness is the thing, and that's energetic.
You know, you were touching on, the fears and sort of the outlook and attitude that we have. We touched on the first episode around grief and how we're afraid to feel those emotions and things. How does us changing our relationship with grief and getting to a better place with the idea of let's say like impermanence, how is that lessening the suffering?
Yeah. So I think that the key element to helping that is not merely an intellectual discussion, it's
Hmm.
experiential. It's by connecting with oneself in the way that for example, you've taken my meditation class, so I call it turning within. By turning within in an easy, effortless way through meditation, what does that do? That does a lot of things. It does some biochemical and biological things like balancing your cortisol and your brain chemistry and your blood chemistry and so forth, reducing the stress hormones. But it also allows the mind to connect with its larger sense of self, which is more,
Yeah.
there's a more of a permanence to that that lasts, as we were just saying, from 2 years old to 20 years old to 40 years old to 60 years old. There's some permanence to some aspect of us that's continuing. And we're just talking about this lifetime, never mind other lifetimes. Just talk about
Hmm.
lifetime. There's something that's continuing there that's not just your thoughts and emotions. Now, because most people are walking around planet Earth thinking that their mind is their thoughts and emotions, and that's what makes up their mind. No, what I say is that, and what I teach and what my students experience eventually when they take the meditation class, is that their mind is the experiencer of their thoughts and emotions.
Yes, it's like I don't know what the word would be. Is it like a transmitter or something like, because you know how we have like the brain and then like our thoughts and things are like almost like a software and it's going through the hardware. The mind and the thoughts are going through our mental construct.
Yeah. The mind is the experiencer of the experiences we're having. And
Right.
personality traits that we each uniquely have that are different from everybody else, that's what unique means, right?
Hmm.
Are what filter those thoughts and emotions and so forth and affect our behavior and
Hmm.
so forth. That's why two different people can have the same thought about something and react very differently to the same situation, but yeah, they have the same thought because it's going through their personality traits and so forth, and express and we see the expression of that in their behavior and their actions, which may be very different from each other, you know?
Right.
So
Yes.
the thing is back to the permanence impermanence thing. Most people, when they think, in my opinion, incorrectly, that their mind is their thoughts and emotions, they identify themselves with an incredible sense of impermanence, to use your word, fleeting, changing. For those people who don't know what impermanence means, it means fleeting, changing. It's changing all the time. And that's what people's experience is that their thoughts and emotions are changing all the time. But if they think that that's only who they are, then that gives them a great sense of insecurity and instability, and therefore
Yeah.
anxiety and stress. Whereas meditating and turning within and connecting with that plus that larger sense of self
Yes.
continuing and therefore more permanent through our lifetime, It's that aspect of ourselves that remembers when we were 2 years old and 10 years old and 20,
Mhm.
30 years old, and is that we are the same person, whatever you want to call that, that aspect of us that remembers that we're the same person. That's what I'm referring to as the mind or the soul consciousness or whatever.
Right. That eternal aspect of us.
Yeah, it's more, it's the more eternal aspect of us. Yeah. And
Mhm.
and by connecting with that regularly, that gives us a sense of security, the opposite of the fleeting.
Yes, it's like it's in that space where we build resilience and a reverence for life in such a way that opens us up to be able to appreciate death. And when you can anchor into that part of thyself and do these practices where you are tapping into the larger self, the thing that's connected to all things, you could say, uh, it allows one to then move through the the changes and transitions in a way where we could just be more accepting, I guess, right? It's like we can accept it a little bit more.
Yeah. So death in that context, then of what you're describing, is just another moment of change. It's another.
Hmm.
That's why some people refer to, for those people who believe that the mind continues after we biologically die, they view death as a transition period.
That's
Transitioning
it. Yeah, that's a good word, is a transition. Hmm.
from biological to non-biological form. Still energy, still identifiable. I used to say physical and non-physical. So the body, physical,
Right,
non-physical. I don't say that anymore. I say biological and energetic or something,
right, right. Yep, biological and energetic. Yeah, because there are biological mechanisms that we're needing. I got this really cool, again, I think it was in meditation. I got this really cool download and a visual. And it was like, hey, like when humans go to space, y'all have to wear like the astronaut suit, you need like a breathing mechanism. When you go underwater, you need like scuba gear. And when you come to Earth, when a soul decides to incarnate into a body, we need our respiratory system. The breath is the bridge between the mystery and the matter. Because, right, it's like we need this breathing apparatus to be able to have this existence here. And then once the light or the energy leaves the body, there's no brain waves, no heart waves, no breath happening.
yeah.
And so, yeah.
Interesting you mentioned that because that's one reason people sometimes ask me about meditation and does the meditation the way I teach it use breath? And I say no. There
Mhm.
are other techniques out there, that meditation techniques that use the breath.
Sure.
The unique thing about my meditation technique is you can meditate during the dying process and after you've biologically died. You cannot do a breath technique
Yeah,
when
true.
you're a biological body anymore. And in, I've seen people on the other side sitting in on my meditation classes sometimes. I usually don't say that during my class, but during the meditation, sometimes I've seen beings on the other side doing my technique. So you can meditate doing the turning within technique after you biologically die. You can't do a breath technique if you don't have a
Wait,
biological body anymore. That's just a little.
that's so true. That's so true. And I know, well, it's funny that you mentioned that, like being able to see and know that on the other side, they can still use that form of meditation because you don't need the breath. And I did want to talk about those experiences that you've had, going to the other side, or maybe even some of your clients may have had those experiences. I've had those personal experiences too. And I don't know if now's a good time to get into them or this would be a good time to wrap and we could start the next episode with those experiences. What are you thinking?
Um, I'll tell one that's not one of mine
Okay.
about how mine started next session because it's
Okay.
a story, but I'll just tell something that happened with one of my clients.
Okay.
So it'll kind of come full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning about different, you know, grief, death, and dying. This story will wrap it all together, including
Perfect.
the first belief system. So in this book, I talk about my parents and my dad. Uh, Also in that book, both my mom and my dad. But my dad had the first belief system. Okay, so that's important to this story. He had the first belief system, which is science belief. He was an engineer. He believed that's it, and he would say, "My father said this." Janie, if you came over to the house and he met you for the first time, he would just tell you this because he was so proud of just, I don't know why. He would just say it to people, just friends of mine, whatever. He'd just say, you know what happens after you die? You stick me in a box, throw the dirt on me, I'm done. That's what I think. That
Stick
was
a fork in me, I'm done.
put me in a box. Yeah, stick me a fork on me, I'm done. Exactly. It's like stick me in a box, throw the dirt on me, I'm done. And and he always had a cigar hanging out of the well, we were talking. And so he was proud of that first belief system that he had, and he didn't have any fears about death and dying because he really believed in that. He did not like he wasn't like many of my clients are fence sitters, I call them. You know, they have a fear of death because they're not sure what's going to happen. There's uncertainty, so they're kind of a little bit of a first and a second belief system. But my dad was all in first belief system. Material. It's important to this story. So I get a text message from one of my clients one day. This was it's not in my book because the book was written 4 years before this story happened. But my client texts me and he says, I think your dad visited me in my dreams last night. And I'm like, what? And so this is, he's in Ohio, my client. And I never met the guy. People find me on the internet and, I work with them on the phone and Zoom and so forth. So this guy's name is Joseph. And I called him up and I said, Joseph, what are you talking about? And he said, well, he remembers his dreams very, very, very vividly, very clearly. And he said, well, last night, my, I was flying a World War II bomber over the ocean, and this young Asian officer came from the rear of the plane, and we were talking about hydraulic fluids in the big, huge four engines in the bomber. And now Joseph did not know that my dad specialty was hydraulic fluids
Mm-hmm.
as a mechanical engineer when he studied at Northeastern University. So my dad studied Northeastern University, and he literally graduated and then walked down and enlisted in 1942 in the U.S. Army Air Corps. So he was working on these bombers. My dad was. Joseph, he doesn't know my dad was a hydraulic fluid guy. Anyway, they were talking about hydraulic fluids, and he said everything's fine, the engines are fine, and then he looked at Joseph in the dream. This young Asian officer looked at Joseph in the dream, and he said, "You're afraid of death, aren't you?" And Joseph doesn't know who this young Asian officer is at this point. He's like and he looked at the young Asian officer. He said, how do you know that? I've only told 6 people in my life that I'm afraid of death, and I just told the sixth person about 3 weeks ago. And the young Asian officer looked at him and smiled and said, "Oh, you mean my son, Kelvin? That's my son."
That is so crazy. I love it. And I feel like that's just scratching the surface. I know that you probably have some other really cool stories. I have some really crazy stories too. It's one thing to try to intellectualize this stuff and you hear these stories, but until it happens to you, mind blown, and there's no logic that can really explain those things. So I'm looking forward to getting into more of those stories. Is there anything else, though, that you want to say about anything that we touched on already before we wrap this one up?
Good. That's good. It was good discussion.
Good, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you everybody for watching another episode of Good Grief. Until next time, peace be in you. PazMesa. Thank you for watching Good Grief, meeting loss with presence one wave at a time. Be sure to subscribe to Rise Above TV and tune in for the next episode where we'll share more insights about grief so you can face it mindfully.